Close your eyes if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, resting on nothing in particular. Let your body settle. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest where they are, open and easy. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing to hold, nothing to figure out. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight we are going somewhere cold and white and very still. Somewhere in the winter countryside of Japan, where the snow has been falling since morning and the paths between the houses are deep with it, and the rooftops are buried under it, and the whole world has gone quiet in the particular way that heavy snowfall makes the world quiet. Not an empty quiet, but a full one. A quiet that is made of something rather than the absence of something. There is a small house at the edge of a village. There is an old man and an old woman in that house, and between them, enough warmth and enough kindness to fill a house much larger than theirs. And outside, at the edge of the village where the road begins to climb toward the hills, there are 6 stone figures standing in the snow, patient and still and cold, with no hats on their heads. Breathe in slowly and let it out. Part 1. The Village in Winter. This is the story of the old man who gave his hats to the Jizo, and of what came back to him in the night, and of the particular quality of kindness that gives without calculating the return. Let it carry you gently into rest. The village sits in a valley between 2 low hills, in a part of Japan where the winters are long and the snow comes early and stays late, where the cold is a serious thing rather than a brief inconvenience, and where the people who live here have built their lives and their habits around the fact of winter in the way that people do when they have no choice about it and have chosen instead to make a life that works within the thing they cannot change. The houses in this village are built low and solid, their walls thick, their roofs steeply pitched to shed the snow before it can accumulate to the weight that causes damage, though the snow finds ways to accumulate despite the pitch. And the sound of a roof shedding its load of snow, a sudden soft whomp followed by the whisper of the snow sliding down and falling to the ground, is one of the familiar sounds of winter mornings in this place, heard from inside the houses where the families are beginning their days. The paths between the houses are narrow and run between the walls of snow that build up on either side as the winter deepens, so that by the middle of winter, the paths have become corridors, walled in white, their floors packed hard by the footsteps of the people who use them every day, and the village takes on a particular intimate quality in winter, the spaces between the houses reduced and this community pressed closer together by the snow than it is in the more expansive months. The winter sky over the village is rarely clear for long. Low clouds move in from the mountains to the north and the west, bringing more snow. And the light on most winter days is the flat gray light of an overcast sky, diffuse and directionless, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly simplified, as if the world has been reduced to its essential shapes and left its details for another season. On clear days, when the clouds pull back and the sun appears low in the winter sky, the snow catches the light and sends it back in all directions, and the village is briefly brilliant, every surface white and sharp-edged in the cold air, the shadows blue, the sky a deep cold blue above the white of the rooftops, and the people come out of their houses and stand in the light for a while, as if warming themselves at it before it goes again. The sounds of the village in winter are different from the sounds of the village in other seasons. The snow absorbs the higher frequencies and leaves the lower ones, so that the village sounds muffled and deep, the voices of people calling to each other across the snow carrying differently, the bells of the small shrine at the center of the village sounding clearer and more resonant in the cold air, the creak of the snow underfoot as the temperature drops below the point where it compresses silently. The smell of the village in winter is the smell of wood smoke and cold air, and the particular clean smell of deep snow, which is the smell of water in its purest and most patient form, held still by the cold, waiting for the spring to release it back into the world. At the edge of the village, where the road begins to rise toward the pass that leads over the hills to the next valley, there stand 6 stone figures in a row, the Jizo, the guardian bodhisattvas who protect travelers and children and the souls of those who have died, who stand at the boundaries of places where the world of the ordinary and the world of something else come close together. These particular Jizo have been standing at the edge of this village for longer than anyone in the village can remember, which is to say, for a very long time, long enough that the stone has taken on the particular quality of very old stone that has stood outdoors through many seasons, softened at the edges, covered in patches of lichen, the carved features worn but still legible, still recognizably faces, still recognizably patient and calm, in the way that Jizo faces are meant to be. Each figure stands about the height of a seated adult, round-headed and robed, their hands held together in a gesture of prayer or blessing, their expressions the expression of something that has been watching over this road and this village for generations and has seen enough to be neither surprised nor troubled by anything the world produces. In winter, the snow collects on their heads and their shoulders and in the folds of their stone robes, and they stand in it with the equanimity of figures who have stood in snow before and will stand in snow again, and who understand that the snow is simply the winter's way of expressing itself, and that the appropriate response is patience. Part 2. The Old Couple. In this village, in a house near the center of it where the main path crossed the path to the well, there lived an old man and an old woman who had been married for so long that the village thought of them as a single thing in 2 parts, the way a pair of tools that are always used together come to seem like a single tool. Their names were not remarkable. The old man was called Jiisan by the village, and the old woman Oba-san, which are the ordinary words for grandfather and grandmother, and which Japanese people use for elderly people they are fond of regardless of actual relationship, and which, in this case, had been in use for so long that the couple's actual names had been largely forgotten by the younger generations of the village, and remembered only by their exact contemporaries, who were few. They were poor, in the honest and undramatic way that many people in a village like this one were poor, not desperately poor, not hungry, not without shelter or the basic necessities of life, but without excess, without reserves, without the comfortable margin between sufficiency and difficulty that makes difficulty, when it comes, something that can be absorbed rather than something that threatens. The old man made straw hats, the wide, flat hats that farmers wear against the summer sun and that travelers wear against the rain, woven from the rice straw that was abundant in the valley after the autumn harvest, and that he had been working with his hands for so long that the work was as natural to him as breathing, his fingers moving through the familiar motions without his having to think about them, the hats taking shape the way they always took shape, one after another, patient and practical and useful. The life of the village in winter organized itself around the fact of cold and the fact of darkness in ways that were different from the organization of the warmer months, more interior, more domestic, more centered on the small spaces of the house and the fire and the things that could be done without going out into the cold. The men did what outdoor work was necessary, tending the animals, clearing the paths, bringing in wood, checking on neighbors who were old or ill, and then came inside, and the evenings were long and quiet, the work of the hands continuing by firelight, the conversation unhurried, the particular quality of winter evenings present, which is the quality of time that has been slowed down by the cold and the darkness to a pace that is different from the pace of the other seasons, and that some people find oppressive and others find restful. The old man was of the second kind. He had always found winter restful, had always found the long evenings conducive to the kind of slow and careful work that the hat-making required, the fingers moving through the straw by the fire, while the snow fell outside, and the house made its small sounds of warmth and occupation. He made hats through the winter months and stacked them in the corner of the workroom, and watched the stack grow, and thought about the spring markets when they would be sold, and found in the making of them a satisfaction that was not dependent on the selling, the satisfaction of work done well, of the straw taking its shape under his hands, of the finished hat sitting in the corner with the other finished hats, each one complete and useful and made with care. The old woman supplemented this with whatever other work she could find, weaving, mending for neighbors, the preservation and preparation of food, the small commerce of a household that has learned to make the most of everything available to it and to waste nothing. Together they managed, which is the accurate word for a life that is maintained through constant attention and effort, without ever quite achieving the ease that would allow the attention and effort to relax. They managed, and they were grateful for managing, and they did not spend much time thinking about what they did not have, because the what they did have was enough for the living of a life that was, in its modest way, good. The house was small and warm in winter, the aurori burning steadily, the walls keeping out the worst of the cold, the stored food adequate for the winter months ahead, the arrangement of the household reflecting the long practice of two people who have learned to live in a small space together and have negotiated, without ever quite discussing it, the particular accommodations that make such living comfortable. They were kind people, which is to say, they were the kind of people who notice when something needs doing and do it, who give what they have without calculating whether they can afford to give it, who treat the people and the things around them with a consistent care that comes not from effort, but from character, simply how they were, how they had always been, the kindness as natural to them as the way they breathed or the way they moved through the familiar rooms of their familiar house. The evenings that the old man and old woman spent together through the winter had a quality that they both valued without ever quite discussing it, a quality of ease and sufficiency that came from long familiarity and from the particular comfort of being in the company of someone who knows you completely and requires nothing from you but your presence. They talked about small things, what had happened in the village that day, what needed to be done the next day, what the weather was likely to do, the small observations and practical considerations of a life lived in close attention to its immediate circumstances, and they were quiet together in the spaces between the talking, and the quiet was as comfortable as the conversation, neither of them requiring more from the evening than what the evening naturally offered. The old woman sometimes sang while she worked, old songs, the kind that had been sung in this valley for generations, songs about the seasons and the crops and the small events of ordinary life, sung in a voice that was no longer what it had been, but that still carried the quality of the songs themselves, which were not grand songs, but were true ones, and which filled the house on winter evenings with a sound that was both very old and very present. The old man listened to her sing with the pleasure of someone who has heard the same songs for a very long time and has not grown tired of them, because the songs were not things to be tired of, but things to be accompanied by, the way the sound of the river accompanies a person who lives beside it, not always noticed, always present, missed immediately when it is gone. It was the last day of the year, the day that in old Japan was the most important day of the preparation for the new year, the day on which the house was cleaned and the food for the celebration was prepared, and the various things done that needed to be done before the year could close cleanly and the new one begin well. The old woman had cleaned the house with the thoroughness that this day required, every surface wiped, every corner swept, the bedding aired despite the cold, the altar polished and fresh offerings placed before it, and had prepared what food she could for the New Year celebration, which was modest because the resources were modest, but which she had made as good as she could with what was available, which was her way, with everything. The New Year food in Japan is particular. The ozoni soup with its rice cakes, the various small dishes arranged in the lacquer boxes, each one with its own meaning and its own connection to the hopes for the coming year, prosperity and health and happiness, expressed through the careful preparation of specific foods, and the old woman prepared what she could of these with the same attention she brought to everything, aware that the preparation itself was a form of hope, that the act of making the New Year food was a way of saying that she expected there to be a new year worth celebrating. But there was one thing missing that made the preparations feel incomplete. There was no mochi, no rice cake, which was the essential centerpiece of the New Year meal, without which the celebration would be diminished in a way that could be felt, even if it could not quite be articulated. Part 3. The Journey to Town. The old man said that he would take the 5 straw hats he had finished to the market town, which was not far, 2 hours' walk on a clear day, a little longer in the snow, and sell them, and with the money buy mochi for the new year. The old woman said that the snow was heavy, and the road would be difficult, and the old man said that the snow was indeed heavy, but the road was known to him and would be manageable, and that the hats needed to be sold in any case, and today was the last day before the new year, when the market would be open, and so he put on his warmest coat and his straw sandals, and took the 5 hats under his arm and set out. The road from the village to the market town ran along the valley floor for the first part, and then climbed over a low shoulder of hill, before descending into the broader valley where the town sat, and in summer it was a pleasant enough road, well traveled and familiar, with the mountains visible on clear days, and the rice paddies green on either side in the growing season. In winter, and particularly in the kind of winter that this day offered, the snow still falling, not heavily but steadily, the light gray and flat, the temperature cold enough that the breath made clouds that hung for a moment before dispersing. The road was a different thing, less pleasant and more demanding, requiring attention and steadiness, and the kind of patient tolerance for discomfort that the old man had developed over many years of going out, in weather that did not invite going out. He walked with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who knows that the distance is fixed, and that hurrying does not shorten it, but only makes the walking harder, and he noted as he went the things that were worth noting, the way the snow had accumulated differently in the protected places and the exposed ones, the tracks of animals crossing the road in the night, the particular quality of the light in the snow-covered fields on either side, which was not bright, but was luminous in its own way, a soft white light that seemed to come from the snow itself rather than from the sky above. He had made this walk many times, in all seasons, and knew it the way he knew the work of his hands, not thinking about it, but doing it, the road, familiar enough that his feet found their way without requiring much direction from his attention, which was free to be elsewhere. He thought about the new year, and about the old woman waiting at home, and about the mochi he would bring back with the money from the hats, and about the year that was ending and the year that was beginning, with the particular thoughtfulness of someone who is old enough to understand that each new year is a gift rather than a certainty, and who receives it accordingly. The market town, when he reached it, was busy with the particular activity of the last day of the year, people buying and selling with the urgency that deadlines produce, the market stalls doing their best business of the season, the air full of the smells of food being prepared and sold, the sounds of commerce and conversation mixing with the sound of the snow that was still falling on the rooftops. Part 4. The Unsold Hats. He walked through the market with his 5 hats, offering them to the people he passed, and the people he passed looked at the hats, and shook their heads, or walked on without stopping, because on the last day of the year, the things that people wanted to buy were food and paper and incense, and the decorations that would mark the new year, not straw hats, which belonged to the working season and not to the season of celebration, He tried the stalls where such things were sometimes bought and traded, and he tried the people he recognized from previous trips to the market, and he walked the length of the market and back, and no one wanted the hats, and by the time the light was beginning to go from the sky, early, as it always went early in this season, he had sold nothing, and it was time to start back. He stood at the edge of the market for a moment, with his 5 hats under his arm, and thought about this, not with distress, not with despair, because he was not a person given to distress or despair, but with the practical attention of someone who was assessing a situation and deciding how to respond to it. There would be no mochi for the new year. This was a disappointment, and he felt it as a disappointment, particularly on behalf of the old woman who had worked so carefully to prepare the celebration and who deserved to have the centerpiece of it present. But disappointments were part of life, and he had had enough of them to know that they were survivable, and that the new year would come regardless, and that the old woman's company was a better gift than any food, and he turned and started back along the road toward home. Part 5. The return. The road home was longer than the road out had been, in the way that roads are always longer in the return, when the purpose of the journey has not been accomplished, and the cold has settled deeper and the light is going. The snow had been falling all day, and the road was deeper now than it had been in the morning. The familiar landmarks changed by the accumulation, the surface soft and yielding underfoot in a way that made walking more effortful, the cold more penetrating now that the exertion of the outward journey was past and the body was cooling. He walked steadily as he always walked, and the valley was very quiet around him, the particular quiet of a snowfall at dusk, when the light is going and the snow is muffling everything and the world is in the process of closing itself for the night, and there is a quality to the silence that is different from daytime silence, deeper and more complete, as if the world has decided that the day is over and has begun to put itself to rest. He was thinking about the old woman and about the new year and about nothing in particular, in the way that the mind moves on a long familiar walk, when he came around the bend in the road near the edge of the village and saw the 6 Jizo standing in the snow at the side of the path. He had passed them many times, going and coming on this road, and he always looked at them as he passed. Not with particular ceremony, but with the acknowledgement that they were there and that they mattered, the way a person looks at something they respect when they pass it. Part 6. The Hats. Tonight he stopped. He stopped because of the snow on the Jizo's heads, the heavy accumulation of a full day's snowfall, sitting on the stone heads in thick white mounds that must, he thought, be cold, in the way that he thought about cold as something that could be given and received, not only by living things, but by anything that was out in it without protection. He looked at the 6 figures standing in the snow with snow on their heads, their stone faces patient under their white burdens, and he thought about the 5 hats under his arm, and the thought was simple and direct and did not require much consideration. Here were heads that needed covering, and here were hats, and the connection between these two facts was obvious. He placed a hat on the head of the first Jizo, fitting it carefully over the rounded stone head, adjusting it so that the brim would shed the snow rather than catch it, and then moved to the second, and did the same, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. 5 hats for 5 of the 6 Jizo, and when he reached the 6th, he stood for a moment with empty hands, looking at the last figure which still had its burden of snow and no hat to relieve it, and, without particular hesitation, he removed the cloth towel that he had wrapped around his head under his hat against the cold, and folded it, and placed it on the 6th Jizo's head, tucking it in at the edges so that it would stay. Then he stood back and looked at the 6 figures with their new hats and their cloth, and he said something quiet to them. Not a prayer exactly, but the kind of thing a person says when they have done something that feels right and want to acknowledge the feeling, and then he continued home through the snow. Part 7. Coming Home. The old woman was waiting when he came through the door, in the way that she always waited when he had been out longer than expected, not anxious, because worry was not her disposition, but attentive, the particular quality of attention that people have when they are waiting for someone they love in weather that makes travel difficult. He told her about the market, about the hats that had not sold, about the mochi that he had not been able to buy, and she listened without interrupting, and then said that it was all right, that they had enough, that the new year would come regardless, and that they would meet it together, which was the important thing. He told her about the Jizo, about the snow on their heads, and the hats he had given them, and the cloth from his own head that he had given to the last one, and she listened to this with a different quality of attention, not the practical attention with which she had received the news about the market, but something quieter and more considered, the attention of someone who is taking in something that they recognize as significant without being able to say exactly how. She said that he had done right, which was not a complicated thing to say, but was said in a way that meant more than the words themselves. And then she went to heat the soup that was waiting on the fire, and he sat by the irori and warmed his hands and feet, and they ate their simple meal together in the quiet of the last evening of the year, with the snow still falling outside, and the fire burning low, and the house warm, and the world outside very still. Part 8. The Night. They went to sleep early, as they always did in winter, when the darkness came so completely and so early that staying up felt like an argument with the natural order of things. And the warmth of the bedding and the low sound of the fire were an invitation that the body found difficult to refuse. The last night of the year had a particular quality in this village, not festive, because they were not prosperous enough for festivity, but ceremonial in a quiet way. The awareness of the year closing and the new one beginning, present in the darkness of the room, as the old man and old woman lay in their bedding and listened to the snow and the fire, and the particular silence of a winter night in a village where everything that needed to be done had been done, and everyone was resting. They had each said the things they said at the end of each year, gratitude for the year that was ending, for its sufficiencies and its ordinary goodnesses, and hope for the year that was beginning, expressed in the simple and sincere way of people who do not expect too much, and are therefore genuinely grateful for what arrives. The fire burned lower as the night deepened, and the room grew cooler, and the snow continued to fall outside with the patient persistence of snow that has been falling all day and has not yet decided to stop. And the old man and old woman slept in the way that people sleep when they are tired and have clear consciences and warm enough beds and each other nearby. It was in the deepest part of the night, the hours past midnight, when the village was as completely asleep as it ever got, every house dark, every fire low, every person in their bedding, that something moved on the road at the edge of the village. It moved with the particular care of something that is carrying things and does not want to disturb the people it is passing, a careful and deliberate movement through the deep snow, accompanied by a sound that was barely a sound, the soft compression of snow underfoot, a sound that was more felt than heard, and something else, something that might have been the sound of stone moving through snow, patient and unhurried. The 6 Jizo came down the road from the edge of the village in the way that stone things move when they have been given occasion to move, slowly, steadily, without drama, with the same expression on their round stone faces that they had always had, which was the expression of things that have seen everything and are surprised by nothing, and find in the world, as it is, enough to inspire a quality of feeling that is not quite happiness, but is something in the same direction. They carried things that they had gathered from wherever such things come from when they are called by an act of pure kindness on the last night of the year. Things that were heavy enough that the Jizo moved carefully under their weight. Things that were, in the way of gifts that arrive in stories, exactly what was needed and more. They came to the house of the old man and the old woman, and they set down what they had brought at the door and around the door and in the space before the door, carefully, quietly, with the consideration of guests who do not wish to wake the household, and when everything was placed as it should be, they stood for a moment in the snow before the house, their stone faces looking at the door, their hats and their cloth hat still on their heads, the snow falling around them with the same patient indifference with which it had been falling all day. And then they turned and went back up the road to their places at the edge of the village, moving through the snow with the same careful, unhurried movement with which they had come. And when they had reached their places, they stopped and became still again, the way stone things become still, completely and immediately. And the road was empty, and the village was asleep, and the snow continued to fall and cover everything, and in the morning it would look as if nothing had moved at all. But something had been left. Before the door of the house where the old man and the old woman slept, in the snow of the last night of the year, there were now things that had not been there before. Things that the old woman would find when she opened the door in the morning, and that would make her call her husband's name in a voice that was not quite steady, and that he would come to and stand beside her and look at for a long time without speaking, in the particular silence of people who are receiving something that exceeds what they had asked for and what they had imagined receiving. Part 9. The Morning. The morning of the new year came the way winter mornings come, gradually, the darkness thinning at the edges before the light properly arrived, the cold at its worst in the hour before the dawn, the house very quiet and the fire needing to be rebuilt from the coals that had kept through the night. The old woman woke first, as she usually did, and rebuilt the fire and set the water to heat, and did the small ordering of the morning that she always did before calling her husband, the household resuming its daily shape in the particular order that long habit had established, and that she performed without thinking, her hands and her feet knowing what to do next before her mind had quite caught up with the fact of being awake. When the morning was sufficiently established, she went to the door to look at the snow and to see what the New Year's morning had brought in the way of weather, which was always the first thing to know on a winter morning in a place like this, since the weather would determine the shape of the day. She opened the door, and the cold came in with the clean smell of a winter morning after a night of snowfall, and the light came in too, the particular pale light of a winter morning when the sky is just beginning to show its intentions for the day, and she looked out at the new year and saw what was there. There was rice, a great deal of it, more than they would use in many months, in bags that sat in the snow before the door, with the self-possession of things that know they are exactly where they should be. There was mochi, the rice cakes that she had wanted for the New Year celebration, stacked carefully in the traditional way, round and white and perfect, more than enough for the celebration and beyond. There were vegetables and fish and the other things that make up a New Year's meal done properly, all of it arranged with a care that suggested it had been placed by hands that understood what was needed and had taken the time to provide it fully. And there were other things too, things that spoke to a generosity that went beyond the immediate need, things that would make the months ahead easier in ways that the old woman and old man had not dared to hope for, provisions against the cold and the lean season that lay between now and the spring. She called her husband, and he came and stood beside her in the doorway and looked at what was there, and neither of them spoke for a long time, because the appropriate response to something like this is not words, but the kind of silence that is itself a form of gratitude, full rather than empty, complete rather than insufficient, the silence of people who have been given more than they can express and who understand without being told where it has come from. The old man looked down the road toward the edge of the village, to where the 6 Jizo stood in their row in the morning snow, and he could see from here, even at this distance, that they were still wearing their hats, the 5 straw hats and the cloth, and that they stood in the New Year's morning as they always stood, patient and still and calm, their stone faces turned toward the road and the valley and the world that lay beyond. He bowed to them deeply, with a full seriousness of the bow, holding it for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and the old woman beside him did the same. and the New Year's morning was quiet around them, and the snow that had fallen in the night lay clean and unbroken on the road between them and the Jizo, and the light was beginning to come into the sky in the east with the particular quality of the first light of a new year, which is the same as the first light of any other day, but carries in it, for the people who are watching it, something that other lights do not carry. They brought the gifts inside, the two of them working together in the easy, practical way of people who have worked alongside each other for many years, and the house filled with the presence of more than it was accustomed to holding. And the new year began in the warmth of a house that was, for the first time in a long time, fully provisioned, and with the particular quality of contentment that comes from having been given more than you asked for by something that does not require thanks, but receives it anyway. Part 10, The New Year. The New Year's meal was made that morning with the proper care and the proper ingredients, and the old man and old woman ate it together at their small table with the awareness of people who understand that they are eating something that is more than food, that the mochi and the soup and the other things on the table carry in them a meaning that goes beyond their ingredients, a meaning that has to do with gratitude and with the continuation of things and with the particular sacredness of the first meal of a new year, eaten in a warm house with the person you have shared your life with. They talked about ordinary things, as they usually did, and they were quiet together in the way they had always been quiet together. And the new year began with the same quality of ordinary goodness that their years together had always had, except that the house was fuller than it had been for a long time, and there was a quality of ease in the morning that was new, a sense of not needing to calculate quite so carefully, of having enough and more than enough. That was itself a kind of gift that went beyond the visible gifts stacked inside the door. In the afternoon, the snow stopped, and the clouds thinned and pulled back, and the sun appeared low in the winter sky, and sent its light across the snow-covered valley in a way that turned everything briefly golden before the cold took the light away and the long winter evening began. The old man went outside in the afternoon light and stood for a while, looking at the valley and the hills and the Jizo at the edge of the road, and he felt something that he did not have an exact word for, but that was something in the direction of completeness, a sense of being exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing, in a world that was, in its patient and ancient way, aware of what happened in it. And so the story of the straw hat, Jizo, settles into the stillness of the New Year's morning, like snow settling onto the quiet road, like the warmth of a fire that has been burning through the night and is still burning when the morning comes. The old man and the old woman were real, in whatever way such things are real. Real as the cold of the last day of the year was real. Real as the 5 straw hats under the old man's arm were real. Real as the particular quality of kindness that gives what it has without stopping to ask whether it can afford to give it. Stories like this one carry something true in them about the nature of kindness, that it is not a calculation, that it does not ask what it will receive in return, that it moves from some place that is prior to thought and deeper than intention, from the simple recognition of a need and the simple response of meeting it with what is available. They carry something true about the Jizo themselves, those patient stone figures at the edges of roads and paths throughout Japan, standing in all weathers with their steady expressions, present in the places where the world of the ordinary and the world of something else come close together, neither demanding attention nor refusing it when it comes. They carry something true about the new year, about the way that the turning of the year is a moment of possibility, a threshold where things that would not happen at other times become possible, where kindness given on the last night of the old year can return on the first morning of the new one in forms that exceed what was given and what was expected. Let these things rest in you now. You have traveled tonight through the last day of an old year in a snow-covered village in old Japan, down a familiar road in heavy snowfall with 5 straw hats under your arm, past the patient stone figures at the edge of the world, and home again to a warm house and a simple meal, and the quiet company of someone you have known for a long time and will continue to know. The Jizo are still there, at the edge of their road, as they have always been, standing in whatever weather the season brings, wearing their hats against the snow, their stone faces turned toward the road, with the steady and unhurried attention of things that have been watching for a very long time and have not yet finished watching. The old man and old woman are still there too, in their house near the center of the village, going about the ordinary business of their ordinary days with the same quality of care and attention they have always brought to it, neither more nor less than what is needed, consistent and reliable, and, in their quiet way, good. And the new year is still arriving, as it always arrives. First as a darkness, and then as a lightning. First as the end of what was, and then as the beginning of what will be. Patient and unhurried and certain, the way things are certain when they have been happening for a very long time, and have every intention of continuing. Let it all soften now. The snow-covered village and the narrow paths between the houses, the 6 stone figures standing at the edge of the road, the old man walking home in the late afternoon with his empty hands and his full heart, the gifts arranged in the snow before the door on the first morning of the new year, the warmth of the house and the meal and the company of someone who has always been there and is still there. Let it dissolve gently, like snow melting in spring, like the smoke from the morning fire, rising into the cold, clear air and disappearing. There is nothing left to hold tonight, nothing to figure out, nothing to carry. You are warm and you are still, and you are exactly where you should be. The Jizo are patient. The winter night is kind. Let your breathing slow. Let the quiet take you. Rest well. Sleep well. Good night. Issun Boshi, a Japanese folktale for sleep. Close your eyes if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, resting on nothing in particular. Let your body settle. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest where they are, open and easy. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing to hold, nothing to figure out. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight we are going somewhere small and quiet and full of the particular wonder that comes from seeing the world from a different angle than usual. Somewhere in the spring countryside of Japan, where the rivers run clear and cold from the mountains, and the cherry blossoms are just beginning to open on the trees along the bank, and the days are long and soft and full of the particular quality of a season that has just arrived and has not yet decided to hurry. There is a small village beside a river. There's an old couple in that village, and between them, a child no larger than a fingertip, who arrived unexpected and small and full of a quality that cannot quite be named, a brightness, a confidence, a sense of being exactly the right size for whatever the world requires. Breathe in slowly and let it out. Part 1. The Village by the River. This is the story of the tiny samurai, and of the river that carried him to the city, and of the life that was waiting for him at the end of the journey. Let it carry you gently into rest. The village sits where a small tributary joins a larger river in a valley that opens toward the south and catches the spring sunlight in a way that makes the village warmer and greener than the villages on either side of it. The river that runs through the valley is not large, not the wide, slow rivers of the lowland plains, but quick and clear and full of the energy of water that has recently come down from mountains, carrying in it the cold of the heights and the particular clarity of water that has not yet had time to pick up the color of the lowlands. In spring, the river runs high, fed by the snowmelt from the peaks above, and the sound of it fills the valley from morning to evening, not loud, not overwhelming, but present, a constant and comfortable background to the other sounds of the village, the way a familiar sound becomes simply part of the atmosphere of a place and would be missed immediately if it stopped. The cherry trees along the bank are old. Some of them have been there for generations, their trunks thick and gnarled at the base, their branches spreading wide over the water, and when they bloom in the 3rd month, the whole bank is covered in a pale pink that reflects in the river and makes the water look as if it is carrying blossoms downstream, even when no blossoms have yet fallen. The village is small, perhaps 30 households, and the people in it live in the way that people live in small villages, which is to say, close together and with a particular awareness of each other that larger places do not have, an awareness that can be a comfort and can sometimes be a constraint, but that creates, in people who have grown up with it, a kind of rootedness, a sense of belonging to a specific place and a specific community that is one of the things that is hardest to replace when it is gone. The work of the village is the work that villages in river valleys do, farming the flat land beside the river, fishing the river itself, cutting wood from the forest on the slopes above, maintaining the paths and the bridges and the waterways that keep the valley usable and livable through all the seasons. The seasons here are distinct and full. Spring with its blossoms and its high water and its particular softness, summer with its heat and the deep green of the rice paddies and the sound of the cicadas in the trees, autumn with its harvest and its colors, and the smell of wood smoke beginning to come from the houses in the evenings, winter with its snow and its long, quiet nights, and the river running lower and slower under a skin of ice at the edges. The people here know their valley and their river and their seasons, the way people know things they have grown up with, not always consciously, not always with words, but deeply, in a way that shapes how they move and what they notice and what they feel at home. The village had its particular rhythms that Issun Boshi had grown up inside, without quite seeing them as rhythms, the way a person does not hear the sound of the river they live beside until they go somewhere without a river and notice the absence, and in the years of his childhood, he absorbed these rhythms in the way that children absorb the things that surround them from birth, not as lessons, but as the basic texture of how things are. The morning began with the sound of his father's footsteps on the wooden floor and the sound of the fire being stoked and the particular smell of the breakfast rice beginning to cook that was so consistently the smell of morning that encountering it anywhere always brought him back to this house, this village, this river, valley. The day organized itself around the light, the quality of the spring light that came in through the paper screens in the morning and moved across the floor and the walls through the hours until it left through the western screens in the evening, and the sound of the river that changed through the day as the air changed, closer and louder in the cool of the morning and evening, less present in the heat of the afternoon when other sounds competed with it. He knew every house in the village by the sound it made, the particular creak of the Tanaka family's gate, the sound of the weaver's loom that began each morning from the house at the northern end, the smell of the blacksmith's fire that drifted through the village when the wind was from the east. These things were not remarkable to him as a child, which is how remarkable things are when they are all you have known. But he came to understand their value later, when he had seen enough of the world to know that a place with this quality of particularity, this density of the known and the familiar, was something worth carrying with you. Part 2. The Old Couple. In this village there lived an old man and an old woman who had been married for so long that the village could not remember a time when they had not been married, which in a small village is a measure of considerable time. They were not remarkable people, in the way that most people are not remarkable. They did their work, they kept their house, they maintained their relationships with their neighbors, with the reliable decency of people who understand that community is something that requires tending, like a garden or a fire, and who tended accordingly. The old man worked the small patch of land behind the house and fished the river on the days when the fishing was good, and the old woman kept the house and the garden and made the meals and managed the household with the practical competence of someone who has been doing this for a long time and has learned where all the inefficiencies are and how to work around them. They had no children, which was the one sorrow of their otherwise sufficient life, not a consuming grief, because they had learned to live with it over the years, but a quiet absence that made itself felt sometimes in the evenings when the house was particularly quiet, or when they saw the children of their neighbors playing in the lane, or when they thought about who would look after the house when they were gone. They had prayed for a child, as people who want children and have not had them pray, carefully, persistently, without entirely giving up hope, even when hope seemed unreasonable. Part 3. The Arrival. The child came to them on a spring morning, as unexpected and complete as the first cherry blossom of the season, there one day where there had been nothing the day before, small and perfect and entirely itself. He was no larger than a fingertip when he arrived, which was startling in the way that things are startling when they are exactly as the stories describe them, and you did not quite believe the stories until the moment you were standing in them. The old woman found him in the morning, in the room where the morning light came in first, sitting in the patch of sunlight on the floor, with the self-possession of someone who has arrived exactly where they intended to be, and is simply waiting for the household to catch up with the fact of their presence. She called her husband, and he came and looked, and they both stood for a while in the particular silence of people who are trying to decide how to respond to something entirely outside their experience. And then the old woman simply knelt down and held out her hand, and the tiny boy climbed onto her palm with the easy confidence of someone who has no doubt about being welcome, and that was how it began. They called him Issun Boshi, which means one sun boy, a sun being an old unit of measurement roughly equal to the length of a thumb, and the name suited him, direct and practical and accurate, the way the best names are. Part 4. Growing up small. He did not grow in the way that children grow, the steady upward progress that parents mark on door frames and worry about and celebrate, but stayed the size he was, which was very small, and this turned out to be not the limitation it might have seemed, but simply a different way of being in the world, with its own advantages and its own requirements. The old man made him a bed from a lacquer box, lined with scraps of soft cloth, and a table from a spool of thread, and tiny utensils from the points of pins and the caps of acorns, and these things gave the house a second scale of objects that the old woman sometimes stopped to look at, with a pleasure that she could not quite articulate, the way that very small things, made with care, have a quality of completeness about them that full-size things do not always have. Issun Boshi grew up in the house, and in the village, with the cheerful adaptability of someone who has never known any other way of being, and therefore does not experience their circumstances as limiting. He helped with the household work in the ways available to him, keeping watch on things that needed watching, carrying messages between neighbors, doing the small tasks that required someone very small or someone very patient with small spaces. He was not shy about his size, and he did not pretend to be larger than he was, but moved through the world with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who has decided that the world is large and interesting, and that being small in it is simply the particular angle from which he sees it. There were advantages to his size that he discovered gradually, the way a person discovers the advantages of things that are simply given to them at birth, and therefore seem at first like simply the way things are rather than gifts. He could move through spaces that were closed to everyone else, under the floorboards where the cats went in winter, through the gap in the garden wall where the wisteria had worked its way between the stones over many years, into the space beneath the Ingawa, where the light came through in thin lines, and the ground smelled of old wood and earth, and the particular dust of places that are rarely disturbed. These places had a quality of privacy and completeness that he valued. The sense of being in the world, and also slightly outside it, close enough to the ordinary life of the house to hear it and smell it and feel its warmth, but in a position of observation rather than participation, which is a useful position for anyone who wants to understand things carefully. He spent a great deal of time observing in the years of his childhood, and what he observed he thought about carefully, and what he thought about carefully he understood with a depth that surprised people sometimes. Not children who performed their understanding for approval, but the kind of understanding that is evident in the quality of the questions a person asks and the things they notice that others do not. The insects that most people stepped over without noticing were, to him, neighbors of a kind. The ants that maintained their roads through the garden with a diligence that he respected. The beetles that moved through the fallen leaves with the unhurried confidence of creatures who know their business. The spiders that built their webs in the corners of the Ingawa with an engineering precision that he found genuinely impressive. He was curious about everything in the way of someone for whom the world is always at a different scale from everyone else, which gives even familiar things an unfamiliarity that keeps them interesting. A blade of grass was, to him, a substantial object with texture and structure and a particular way of catching the light. A pebble that a person might kick without noticing was, to him, a boulder with its own geography. The river, when he went to its bank with his father on fishing days, was vast and powerful and full of a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and the fish in it were creatures of considerable size and dignity, and the whole experience of being beside it was one that reminded him, if reminding were necessary, that the world was very large, and that this was not a problem but a fact, and a rather wonderful one. His parents loved him with the particular intensity of people who have wanted something for a long time and have finally received it, not in the form they expected, but in a form that turned out to be entirely its own and entirely sufficient, and whose particular qualities they had come to appreciate in ways they could not have anticipated before they knew him. The old woman worried about him sometimes, in the way that mothers worry about children who are going to go out into a world that is not scaled for them, and she expressed this worry in the practical way of someone who knows that worry is not useful, but action sometimes is, teaching him everything she knew that might be useful, which turned out to be a great deal. Part 5. The Decision. It was in the spring of his 15th year, though he looked no different from how he had looked at 5, and would look no different at 50, being the kind of person whose age lived in their eyes and their manner rather than in their face, that Issun Boshi told his parents he wanted to go to the capital. He told them this in the direct way he had of saying things that he had thought about carefully and decided, which was different from the way he said things he was uncertain about. There was a settledness to it, a quality of something that had been considered from all angles and found to be right, and his parents recognized this quality and understood that it meant what it meant. He told them that he had learned everything the village could teach him, that there was a larger world beyond the valley, and that he wanted to know it, that the capital was where things happened, and where a person could become whatever they were capable of becoming, and that he believed he was capable of more than the village currently had occasion for. He said all of this without arrogance, It was simply a statement of what he understood to be true, delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone he brought to everything. And his parents listened and said nothing for a while, because there was nothing to say that would change what they already knew, which was that he was right, and that the time had come, and that the difficulty of letting him go did not make the letting go any less necessary. Part 6. The Preparation. The preparations for the journey were modest, as preparations for a person of Issun Boshi's size necessarily were. A lacquer bowl that would serve as his boat, a chopstick that would serve as his oar and his pole, and, if necessary, his staff, a sewing needle that would serve as his sword, tucked into a sheath of straw, and a small bundle of the things his mother had prepared for him, rice enough for several days, dried fish, a few other things wrapped carefully in leaves and tied with thread. The needle sword was his father's idea, and it was a good one. A needle properly handled is a precision instrument, and the old man had spent an evening showing Issun Boshi the ways it could be used, working through the movements with the seriousness of someone who wants to give what protection he can to someone he loves, who is going somewhere he cannot follow. Issun Boshi received this teaching with the same focused attention he brought to everything, practicing the movements until they felt natural, until the needle was an extension of his hand rather than something he was holding, and thanking his father with the simple sincerity of someone who understands the value of what has been given without making too much of it. The morning of departure came with the particular quality of spring mornings, clear and cool, the cherry trees still in bloom along the river bank, the water running high and fast with the snow melt, the whole valley fresh and vivid in the early light as if it had been newly made. His parents walked with him to the river, the old man carrying the bowl and the chopstick, the old woman carrying the small bundle, and when they reached the bank, they stood together for a while in the way of people who have things to say and are not sure which of them to say first. Part 7. The River Journey. They said what parents say to children who are leaving. Take care of yourself, eat properly, write when you can, remember where you come from, and Issun Boshi received all of it with the patient affection of someone who knows that these things are not really instructions but expressions of love in the form that love takes when there is nothing else to give, and he promised what he promised, and then he climbed into the lacquer bowl and took up the chopstick and pushed off from the bank. The river took him immediately, with the decisive ease of water that knows where it is going, and the bowl moved into the current, and the current carried it, and his parents stood on the bank and watched until the river bent, and the trees closed in, and the small shape of the bowl was no longer visible, and then they stood a while longer, looking at the place where it had been, and then they walked home. The journey down the river was the first long journey Issun Boshi had ever made, and it was, for all its simplicity, one of the most beautiful things he had ever experienced. The world from the surface of the water was different from the world seen from the shore, lower, closer to the water itself, with a different relationship to the reflections and the ripples and the way the light moved on the surface. The banks passed on either side, sometimes close and wooded, sometimes opening out into the flat farmland of the valley, and the things he saw from his small bowl were the same things that people walking the riverside path saw, but seen differently, from below, from the water, from the perspective of something that is moving with the current rather than alongside it. He paddled when the current slowed and rested when it was strong, and the river carried him through the days with the patient reliability of something that has been doing this for a very long time and will continue to do it long after this particular journey is over. At night he pulled the bowl to the bank and slept under the overturned bowl the way a person sleeps under a roof, with the sound of the river nearby and the spring peepers calling from the reeds and the stars visible through the gap where the bowl did not quite reach the ground. The spring countryside through which the river ran was at its best in these weeks. The fields newly planted, the hillsides green with the particular vivid green of young growth, the orchards in blossom, the air carrying the mixture of soil and water and flower that is the particular smell of Japan in spring, and that is different from the spring smell of any other place. He ate his mother's carefully prepared food and thought about what lay ahead, and watched the kingfishers that hunted along the river with their particular arrow-quick dives, and listened to the sound the water made over the stones in the shallower sections, and felt, in the way that people feel when they are moving towards something they want, a quality of rightness about the direction he was going that had nothing to do with the certainty of what he would find when he got there. The river grew wider and slower as it descended toward the capital, and the banks became more populated, more cultivated, the signs of a larger and more complex world beginning to appear on either side, more boats on the water, more bridges, more buildings visible through the trees. The nights on the river were their own kind of experience, quieter than the days, with a different quality of sound, the water's conversation with itself more audible in the absence of the daytime sounds, the frogs beginning their evening chorus from the banks, the occasional splash of a fish, the rustling of the reeds and the small breezes that moved along the surface of the water in the cooling evening air. He lay in the bowl on those nights and looked at the sky through the gap above him, the spring sky full of stars that were familiar from the village, but that looked different from the surface of the river, reflected in the water on either side of him, so that he was surrounded by stars above and below, floating between two skies in the way that the river sometimes made you feel when the reflections were very clear. The Milky Way was visible on the clearest nights, a river of light above the river of water, and he thought about the stories he had heard as a child, about the stars, the weaver and the cowherd, the river of heaven that separated them, and felt, floating on his own river under that sky, a kind of kinship with those stories that he had not felt when he heard them in the house by the fire. On the second morning of the journey, he came around a bend in the river and saw a heron standing in the shallows, very tall, very still, its long neck curved in the patient way of herons who are waiting for something and have as much time as is needed for the waiting. The heron looked at him as he passed, with the mild, unsurprised gaze of a creature that has seen many things come down the river and has decided that most of them are not worth more than a glance, and then looked back at the water, and Issun Boshi paddled past with a feeling of having been acknowledged by something old and well established in its ways. Part 8. The Capital. The capital was larger than anything Issun Boshi had imagined, which was saying something because he had imagined it carefully and at length during the journey. The scale of it, the size of the buildings, the number of people, the width of the main streets, the noise and the color and the sheer density of human activity concentrated in one place, was something that could be described but not quite prepared for, the way that certain experiences can be described accurately and still arrive as a surprise when you are inside them. He navigated it the way he navigated everything, carefully, with attention, taking in what he saw without rushing to conclusions about it, finding his way by observation and by the willingness to ask for help when asking was more efficient than wandering. He found his way to the house of a court noble, a large and well-ordered household near the center of the city, and presented himself at the gate with the directness that was his characteristic manner, stating simply that he was looking for a position and that he was prepared to do whatever work was suitable to his particular abilities. The gatekeeper who received him looked at him for a long time without speaking, and then went inside, and came back after a while with the steward of the household, who also looked at him for a long time, and then went inside, and came back after a while with the lord of the house himself, who looked at him for a long time, and then said that he had never seen anything like this before, and that he supposed there was no particular reason why there should not be a position for someone of his size in a household of this kind, and that he would give the matter some thought. The position he was given was that of companion and guard to the lord's daughter, a young woman named Sanjo Jaime, which was not her formal name but what the household called her, and who had a quality of stillness and observation about her that reminded Issun Boshi, in certain lights, of the river he had traveled down to get here. She received him without the prolonged astonishment that most people required, simply looking at him carefully for a moment, and then asking him, in a practical tone, whether he preferred to travel in her sleeve or to walk beside her, and whether he had any dietary requirements she should know about. He told her that walking suited him well enough in most circumstances, but that the sleeve was useful when the distances were long or the ground was difficult, and that he ate what was available and had no particular requirements, and she nodded and said that she thought this arrangement would work well, and that was the beginning of it. The household was large and well run, with the particular quality of order that comes not from strictness, but from good habits maintained over time, and Issun Boshi settled into it with the adaptability that had characterized him since childhood, finding the ways that he could be useful, learning the rhythms of the place, earning a reputation for reliability and good judgment that had nothing to do with his size and everything to do with the quality of his attention. The seasons passed over the household and over the capital, and Issun Boshi moved through them in the company of Sanjo Hime, who turned out to be a person of considerable depth and considerable patience, and between whom and Issun Boshi there developed, over the months, the kind of easy and honest companionship that develops between people who respect each other and find each other genuinely interesting. Part 9. Life in the Capital. The life of the household followed the rhythm of the capital's seasons, which was different from the rhythm of the village, more ceremonial, more structured, with the observances and festivals and formal occasions that a court household maintained and that gave the year a particular shape of its own. In spring there were cherry blossom viewings, the household moving to the garden or to the park beside the river, to sit under the trees and eat and drink and appreciate the blossoms with the particular attention that Japanese people have always brought to this particular beauty. Not casual appreciation, but something more focused, more aware of the brevity of the thing being appreciated, which gives it a quality that it would not otherwise have. Issun Boshi accompanied Sanjo Hime to these gatherings and watched them from his particular vantage point, which was lower than anyone else's, and gave him a view of the blossoms from underneath, looking up into the pale pink mass of them against the spring sky, which was not a view that anyone else had, and which he found, every spring, to be one of the more beautiful things available to someone of his size. In summer, the household moved its activities to the cooler parts of the grounds, the garden in the evenings, the rooms where the cross breezes ran, and the long summer evenings were spent in the particular way of court households in summer, with music and with conversation, and with the kind of slow and pleasant passing of time that is possible when the days are long, and the heat has eased, and there is nowhere in particular that needs to be gone to. Autumn in the capital had a quality that was different from autumn in the village, more formal, more observed, with the particular attention that a court household brought to the seasonal transitions, marking them with ceremony and with the arrangement of flowers and the burning of incense, appropriate to the season, and the careful placement of objects that evoked autumn without stating it directly, the way refined taste always prefers suggestion to declaration. The maples in the garden turned in October with a slowness that rewarded attention. First the tips of the leaves, then the outer branches, then the whole tree, the color moving through the spectrum from green to yellow, to the deep red that Japanese maples achieve in the best years, when the temperature drops at the right time, and the rain comes at the right time, and everything conspires to produce the colors that people come from far away to see. Issun Boshi accompanied Sanjoheim to the garden on the evenings when the light was right for appreciating the maples, and they sat on the ingawa and looked at the trees in the way that people look at things that will not last much longer, with the quality of attention that impermanence calls forth, not sad exactly, but aware, and the awareness making the looking more complete than it would otherwise be. Winter in the capital was colder than it looked, the wind coming off the mountains to the north and moving through the streets and gardens with a sharpness that the architecture of the capital, built for ceremony and for beauty rather than for warmth, did not always deflect. The household moved indoors in the cold months, and the evenings were spent in the heated rooms, with the braziers burning and the paper screens closed against the dark, and there was a quality of enclosure and warmth to these evenings that Issun Boshi associated, ever afterward, with the smell of charcoal and the sound of light rain on the roof, and the particular feeling of being inside a warm room in a cold city in winter. Part 10. The Encounter. It was on an autumn afternoon when the maples in the garden were at their brightest, and the air had the particular clarity of autumn days in the capital that the Oni appeared. They came into the garden from the direction of the gate. Two of them, large and loud in the way of creatures that have never had to consider the feelings of anything smaller than themselves. Not malicious exactly, but careless, the way things are careless when they are very large and have never had occasion to be careful. Sanjo Hime stood very still when she saw them, with the composure of someone who has been raised to maintain composure in exactly these kinds of situations, and Issun Boshi, who was in his usual place at her side, took in the situation with the quick assessment of someone who has spent years thinking about how to navigate a world in which most of the obstacles are larger than he is. He stepped forward, which required a step of considerable resolution given the relative sizes involved, and addressed the Oni in a clear and steady voice, telling them that they were in a private garden and that they should leave, and that if they had any business with the household, they should present themselves at the gate in the usual way and wait to be received. The Oni looked down at him with the surprised expression of creatures who have rarely been addressed by anything this small, and then looked at each other, and then looked back at him, and one of them reached down and picked him up, which was a situation that Issun Boshi had considered as a possibility, and had prepared for accordingly. Part 11. The Needle and the Mallet. What followed was brief and decisive, and, from the Oni's perspective, extremely unpleasant. The needle, wielded by someone who knew exactly what he was doing with it, and who had the advantage of being very small in a situation where very small was strategically useful, did its work with a precision that the Oni had not expected and could not counter, and the encounter ended with the Oni departing in considerable haste and leaving behind in their hurry a small wooden mallet that one of them had been carrying. The mallet was a Uchai no Kazuchi, a lucky mallet, the kind that appears in old stories as an instrument of transformation, capable of making things appear or disappear or change their nature when struck against the ground. Sanjo Hime picked it up and looked at it for a moment, and then she looked at Issun Boshi, who was standing in the garden looking entirely composed, for someone who had just faced two Oni considerably larger than himself, and she said that she thought she knew what to do with it, and asked if he would like her to try. He said that he would, with the same matter-of-fact tone he brought to everything, and she struck the mallet against the ground once, and then again, and with each strike Issun Boshi grew, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, the way things grow when they have been ready to grow for a long time, and have simply been waiting for the right conditions. When the growing stopped, he was a young man of ordinary height, standing in the autumn garden in the late afternoon light, and the garden looked entirely different from this angle than it had from the angle he had known all his life, and different was not worse, simply different, and he stood for a while taking it in. Part 12. After the Change. The world at ordinary height was a different world from the world he had always known, and he moved through the first days of it with the careful attention of someone who is learning a new environment, the same attention he had always brought to things, but applied now to the experience of being the same size as the furniture, the same height as the doors, able to reach things that had always been far above him, and to see over things that had always obscured his view. He found, as the days passed, that he missed some things about his former size, the particular quality of seeing the world from close to the ground, the relationship with small things that had always been objects of interest, rather than things walked past without noticing, the vantage point under the cherry blossoms that he had valued each spring and would now have to find a different way of approximating. But he found other things that were new and good, the ease of moving through the world without the constant navigation that small size had required, the ability to be useful in ways that had been closed to him before, the experience of shaking hands with people at a height where they could look him in the eye without kneeling. Sanjohime watched him navigate the change with the fond attention she had always brought to watching him navigate things, and they continued to talk in the easy way they had always talked, and the companionship between them, which had been built on something more substantial than the circumstances of his size, remained what it had been and became, with time and with the natural logic of two people who have spent years in each other's good company, something more. Part 13. The Return. He went back to the village in the spring, as he had always intended to do when he had something worth going back with, and his parents stood at the door of the house and looked at the young man walking up the path, and did not recognize him until he was close enough that they could see his eyes, which were the same eyes they had always known. And then his mother wept, and his father said nothing for a long time, and then said something about the cherry trees being particularly good this year, which was the way he expressed things that were too large for direct expression. He stayed for some weeks, helping with the spring planting and the fishing and the maintenance of the house, doing the work with the competence of someone who has been away long enough to have missed it, and his parents watched him with the particular pleasure of people who have something back that they thought they might not get back, and the house was full in a way that it had not been for a long time. He told them about the river journey, and the capital, and the household, and Sanjohime, and they listened with the focused attention of people who are storing up what they are hearing to take out and think about later. And when he had finished, his mother said that she was glad he had found people who were worthy of him, which was not exactly what she meant, but was close enough. And his father said that it was good that the needle had been useful. He returned to the capital when the spring was fully established, carrying with him the memory of the village and the river and his parents' faces at the door, which was a good memory to carry, and one he returned to often in the years that followed. And so the story of the tiny samurai settles into the warmth of the spring evening, like the cherry blossoms settling onto the surface of the river, like the sound of the current moving over the stones in the quiet after the day's work is done. He was real, in whatever way such things are real. Real as the needle in the straw sheath was real. Real as the river that carried the lacquer bowl downstream in the spring light. Real as the care of the old couple who made a bed from a lacquer box and a table from a spool of thread, and loved what they had been given with the whole of what they had to give. Stories like this one carry something true in them about size, and about the way that the size of a thing and the quality of a thing are not the same thing, that what a person is capable of has very little to do with how large they are, and a great deal to do with the quality of their attention, and the steadiness of their character, and the willingness to step forward when stepping forward is required. They carry something true about rivers, about the way that moving water takes you where you need to go, if you are willing to get into the boat and trust the current, and about the particular quality of spring rivers, high with the snowmelt, running clear and cold and full of the energy of the season. They carry something true about the world, seen from close to the ground, about the things that are visible from there, that are not visible from higher up, the texture of the grass, and the architecture of the small stones, and the way the light falls differently at that level, and about the value of having once known the world at that scale, whatever scale you inhabit afterward. Let these things rest in you now. You have traveled tonight through the spring countryside of old Japan, down a river in a lacquer bowl with a chopstick for an oar, through the blossoming orchards and the new green fields and the wide slow water of the river approaching the capital, and into the life of a household and a city, and a companionship that turned out to be worth the journey. The river is still there, running in its spring fullness, carrying whatever is entrusted to it downstream, with the patient, unhurried confidence of water that knows where it is going. The cherry trees are still there along the bank, their blossoms opening in the third month as they have always opened, pale pink against the spring sky, reflected in the water below. The old couple is still there in their house by the river, in the story, tending their garden and their fire and their love for a child, who came to them small and left them full-sized, and came back to them in the spring with the river still in his eyes. Let it all soften now, the lacquer bowl on the river, the needle in its straw sheath, the autumn garden and the lucky mallet, the cherry blossoms falling into the current, the sound of the water over the stones in the clear spring evening. Let it dissolve gently, like the cherry blossoms that last only a week and are beautiful partly because of it, like the sound of a river that continues after you've stopped listening. There is nothing left to hold tonight, nothing to figure out, nothing to carry. You are warm, and you are still, and you are exactly where you should be. The river is patient. The spring night is kind. Let your breathing slow. Let the quiet take you. Rest well. Sleep well. Good night. The Old Man Who Made the Flowers Bloom, a Japanese folktale for sleep. Close your eyes if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, restin' on nothing in particular. Let your body settle wherever you are. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest open and still. There's nothing you need to do right now, nothing to hold on to. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight, we are going to a village in Japan, a quiet village, a small one, the kind of village that existed in the mountains and valleys of Japan for hundreds of years, where the houses were close together and the people knew each other's names, and the seasons arrived one after another with the particular reliability that people in such places have always depended on. This is one of the oldest kinds of Japanese stories, a story about kindness and what kindness makes possible, and the particular way that the world around us sometimes responds to the quality of what we bring to it. It is a story about a dog and the old man who loved him, about a tree stripped bare by winter, and what happens when the right person stands beneath it with the right kind of ash in their hands, about the moment when what was dead becomes suddenly, unexpectedly alive, when the blossoms open where no blossoms were possible, and the world stops for just a moment in its turning to notice. Breathe in slowly and let it out. Let the day go. There is nowhere else to be tonight but here, in this quiet village, watching the snow melt and the first light of spring begin. There was once an old man who lived at the edge of a village with his wife and their dog. The dog's name was Shiro. The word means white, and white was what he was, entirely, from the tip of his nose to the end of his tail, the kind of white that is not simply the absence of color, but seems to carry its own quality of light, the white of fresh snow or the white of the first cherry blossoms, before the petals have had any time to take on the warmth of the sun. The old man had found him years ago when Shiro was not yet grown, a small white shape at the edge of the road in the rain, shivering, uncertain, the kind of creature that has not yet decided whether the world is something to be trusted. The old man had stopped. He had looked at the small dog for a moment, looked at the wetness of the fur, the particular way the dog was holding himself with a careful stillness that is different from calm, the stillness of something that is waiting to see what happens next. Then he had bent down and picked the dog up and put him inside his jacket and carried him home. His wife had looked at the small, wet creature that her husband brought through the door. She had not said, "Why did you bring that home?" She had said, "Put him by the fire, he's cold." And that was that. Shiro grew. He became the kind of dog that is entirely at home in a particular place, that has made one house the center of his world, and one person the center of that center, and who expresses this not through any dramatic performance, but through the simple constancy of being wherever you are, of following you from room to room, of waiting at the door with the particular quality of waiting that only dogs have, which is complete and uncomplicated and entirely without resentment. The old man loved him, not in the abstract way of a person who values the concept of a pet, but in the specific way of a person who has spent years with a particular creature and has learned its particular ways and has become, in some sense, known by it in return. Shiro knew the old man's footsteps from a distance, could distinguish them from other footsteps on the path outside the house, and would rise and go to the door before the man himself appeared. The old man knew Shiro's sounds, the particular bark that meant something interesting outside, the different sound that meant something alarming, the soft sound that meant nothing in particular except that Shiro was there, and the old man was there, and both of them were exactly where they should be. Dogs have lived alongside people in Japan for a very long time. Archaeological evidence places dogs among the inhabitants of the Japanese archipelago as far back as the Jomon period, the long prehistoric era that lasted roughly from 14,000 years ago to 300 years before the Common Era, making the relationship between dogs and people in Japan one of the oldest continuous relationships of its kind anywhere in the world. The dogs of the Jomon period were not the domesticated companion animals of the modern imagination, were not the particular breeds that have been developed over centuries for particular purposes and particular aesthetics, but they were dogs, living in close proximity to human settlements, sharing food and fire and whatever else the people of that time shared with the animals they kept near them. Over the millennia that followed, the relationship deepened and diversified. Different kinds of dogs for different kinds of work. Hunting dogs, herding dogs, the dogs that guarded houses, and the dogs that accompanied travelers, and the dogs that simply lived in the ordinary way of household animals, doing the fundamental thing that dogs have always done in human households, being present. In Japanese folklore, dogs appear frequently in the role they play in this story, as animals whose loyalty extends beyond death, whose attachment to the people they loved persists in some form after the body is gone, manifesting in dreams and visions, and the unexpected behavior of natural things. This is not unique to Japanese tradition. Many cultures have stories of the faithful dog, whose devotion survives death. But in Japan, the idea has a particular resonance, connected to the broader belief in the continued presence of the dead among the living, in the thinness of the boundary between this world and the next, in the capacity of love to cross that boundary in both directions. Shiro is this kind of dog. His loyalty does not end when his life ends. What he had found for the old man in life, the coins in the field, he continues to find for him after death. The abundance in the mortar, the blossoms from the ash. The story moves through his absence, carried by the energy of his presence. The things he gave before he died, continuing to give, long after he was gone. One morning, Shiro led the old man to the field. Not urgently, not with the frantic energy of a dog who has found something alarming, but with the particular insistence of a dog who knows where he is going and wants the person he is with to come along. He stopped at a place in the field, an ordinary place, no different in appearance from any other part of the field, and he began to scratch at the ground. The old man watched. Then he understood, or felt he understood, that something was being shown to him, that the scratching was not random but pointed, that Shiro was trying to tell him something specific about this specific place. He went and got his spade. He began to dig. The earth in the field was the earth of a Japanese mountain village, heavy and dark, with the particular density of soil that has been worked for many generations and has taken into itself the residue of all those years of cultivation, the composted remains of harvests, and the turned-in stubble of rice straw, and the slow accumulation of everything that a living landscape produces when it is cared for over time. The spade went in, and then it struck something. Not a stone, not the particular resistant clunk of a spade hitting buried rock, but something with a different quality, something that gave slightly, something that was not earth. He dug more carefully, and there, beneath the surface, beneath the ordinary dark soil of the ordinary field, were coins, gold coins, a great many of them, more than he had seen in one place in his whole life. He stood for a moment and looked at what was there. Then he looked at Shiro. Shiro looked back at him with the expression that dogs have when they have done the thing they set out to do. Not pride exactly, but a kind of settled satisfaction. The expression of a creature who has completed what it came to complete, and is now ready for whatever comes next. The old man loaded the coins carefully into the baskets he had brought and carried them home. He did not tell the neighbors. He did not make a show of it. He simply brought what had been given to him into the house and sat with his wife in the warmth of the evening and felt the particular quality of gratitude that comes when something unexpected and entirely unearned arrives in your life from a direction you did not anticipate. Next door lived another old couple. They were not bad people exactly, not in the way of people who set out to cause harm, who plan their cruelties in advance and pursue them with deliberate intent. They were simply people in whom the desire for things had become, over the years, the organizing principle of their lives. People who looked at what others had and felt the particular discomfort of wanting it for themselves, who measured their days by what they had accumulated and their satisfactions by how their accumulation compared to the accumulations of others. They had watched the old man come back from his field with heavy baskets. They had noticed the change in the household, the small signs of improved circumstances, the new things, the quality of ease that settles over a house when financial worry has been lifted. They asked, in the way of neighbors who ask things while pretending not to be asking, "How has it been going? Good harvest this year?" The old man was not secretive. He told them about Shiro, about the morning in the field, the scratching, the digging, the coins. The neighbors listened, and in their listening, there was a quality of calculation, the rapid, almost involuntary calculation of people who hear of a good thing and immediately begin working out how to obtain it for themselves. They asked, "Could we borrow Shiro, just for a day, just to walk our field?" The old man looked at them. He looked at Shiro. Shiro was not a thing to be lent, was not a tool to be borrowed and returned when its use was done, but the old man was the kind of person who finds it difficult to refuse a direct request from someone standing in front of him, and so after a moment, he said yes. The village where the two old couples lived was the kind of village that Japan had in great numbers for most of its history. A small community of farming families in a valley or on a mountainside, organized around the work of the rice fields, shaped by the rhythms of the agricultural year and the relationships that form between people who depend on each other for the work that their survival requires. Rice farming in Japan is not a solitary activity. The management of the water, the elaborate systems of irrigation that bring water to the paddies and control its level through the growing season, requires cooperation between neighbors, requires the kind of ongoing negotiation and mutual accommodation that produces, over generations, a particular quality of community life. You cannot flood your field without affecting your neighbor's field. You cannot neglect the shared channels without consequences for everyone who depends on them. The work itself requires more hands than one family has. The planting and the harvest have always been done communally, the village gathering together for the intensive labor of the busy seasons in a way that builds, over the years, the bonds that make a community something more than a collection of separate households. The old man and the neighbor had been living side by side for decades. They had worked the same fields, drunk from the same water, known each other's names since before memory. This is what makes the neighbor's behavior sad as well as wrong. Not just that he was greedy, but that his greed operated against someone he had known his whole life, someone who had been part of the same community, the same shared life. The old stories understand this. They do not place their villains in remote castles or foreign lands. They place them next door, in the house whose chimney smoke you can see from your own window, in the person whose face you have seen every morning for as long as you can remember. The kindness of the old man operated in the same space, not a distant kindness, not the abstract benevolence of a person who is good in general without being good in particular, but the specific daily kindness of a person who treats well the specific people who are actually in front of them. Shiro was in front of him, wet and cold. He brought him inside. The mortar was available. He used it and shared what it gave. The ash was in his hands. He scattered it with care. Kindness, in the old stories, is almost always this simple, not grand, not costly, but present and specific and responsive to what is actually there. The neighbors took Shiro to their field. They pulled him this way and that, impatient, wanting him to find the spot that would give them what they wanted. Shiro did not want to be there. He moved without the ease of an animal in a familiar place, without the settled quality he had when he was in the old man's field, in the old man's presence, and his movements were uncertain, not the confident, purposeful movements of a dog who knows what he is doing, but the reluctant movements of a dog who would rather be elsewhere. He stopped at a place, not because anything was there, not because he had found anything, but because the pulling had stopped and he had run out of direction, and somewhere was as good as anywhere else. The neighbors dug. They dug with the particular energy of people who expect to find something, the digging of anticipation, of greed that has convinced itself it is about to be satisfied. They found nothing, only the dark earth, only the ordinary soil of their field, only the things that are always in the soil of a field that has been worked, old roots, old stones, the quiet accumulation of years. Their frustration turned on Shiro. This is how frustration works in people who have not learned to take responsibility for their own disappointments. It looks for a target, something outside itself onto which the feeling can be placed. Shiro had not given them what they wanted. Shiro had failed them. Shiro was the reason they were standing here in their field with nothing to show for it. What happened next, the story does not dwell on, does not describe in detail, but its consequence was clear. Shiro did not come home. The old man waited. He waited at the door the way he had always waited when Shiro was outside, with the expectation of return, with the ordinary confidence that what had gone out would come back. But Shiro did not come back. And when the evening had fully arrived, and the dark was complete, and still there was no sound of Shiro at the door, the old man went to the neighbor's house and asked. They told him what had happened in the flat way of people who have done something wrong and have decided that the best response to what they have done is to act as if it was not wrong. The old man went home. He did not say anything. He sat with his wife in the quiet of the house and felt the particular silence of a place where a beloved presence had been and was no longer. That night, the old man dreamed. In the dream, Shiro came to him. He was as he had always been, white, entire, the particular white that carried its own light. and he moved with the ease of a dog who is entirely at home, which was the ease he had always had in the old man's presence. In the dream, Shiro told him something. Not in words. Dogs do not speak in words, even in dreams, but in the particular way that dreams communicate things that the waking mind cannot receive, the way of knowing that does not require language, that arrives complete without the mediation of speech. He told the old man, "There is a pine tree at the edge of the garden. Cut it down. Make a mortar from its wood. Use the mortar to pound your rice." The old man woke. He lay for a moment in the dark of the room with the dream still present, still close, with the quality that some dreams have of being more real than waking, of carrying in them a weight and specificity that the ordinary world rarely has. He got up before the light. He went to the garden. There was a pine tree at the edge of it, an old tree, not large, the kind of tree that grows in a Japanese garden and becomes over the years part of the garden's character, the kind of tree that you stop noticing because it has always been there and seems like it will always be there. He stood in front of it for a moment, then he went and got his axe. The pine tree. In Japanese culture, the pine is one of the three friends of winter. The shochikubai, the pine and the bamboo and the plum, the three plants that remain green or that bloom in the cold months when everything else has withdrawn into the dormancy of the season. The pine is green through winter, not the brilliant green of summer, not the full, saturated green of a landscape at its most alive, but green nonetheless, the particular dark green of pine needles that retains its color when the broadleaf trees have shed theirs, when the landscape has gone gray and brown, and the pine stands in it as a reminder that green is still possible, that the world has not entirely given up its color. In Japanese art, in the paintings and the lacquer work and the ceramics of many centuries, the pine appears constantly as a symbol of perseverance and longevity, of the quality of endurance that outlasts the difficulties of winter and time. The pine in the old man's garden had been there for years. It had grown in the same place through the same winters that the old man and his wife and Shiro had grown through, had been part of the landscape of their lives, in the way that the long-lived plants of a garden become part of a life, growing so slowly as to seem permanent, present in the background of so many days that they stop being noticed the way the familiar stops being noticed. Now, it was gone. The old man had cut it down because Shiro had told him to, and made from it the mortar that had given them the abundance of rice, and the mortar had been taken and burned, and what remained of the tree, what remained of all those years of standing in the garden through all those seasons, was ash, a small amount of gray ash, the residue of longevity, the compressed remainder of all those years of slow growth. And it was this ash, this end product of a thing that had been alive and was no longer, that would make the blossoms come on a bare tree in the cold of winter. He made the mortar, not quickly. These things are not made quickly, but with the patience of a person who has worked with his hands his whole life and has learned that the work goes better when you bring to it the quality of time it requires. The pine wood was good wood, dense and fragrant, the smell of pine released by the cutting filling the small workshop where he worked, the particular resinous smell of Japanese pine in winter that is both sharp and warm, both alive and ancient. He shaped the mortar. The mortar is one of the oldest tools in Japanese domestic life, a heavy vessel, usually of wood or stone, used with a pestle to pound rice, to reduce the cooked grain to the smooth, elastic mass from which mochi is made. Mochi, the rice cake that is central to Japanese celebration, to the New Year and the winter festivals, and the particular pleasures of the cold season, requires this work, this patient pounding, this reduction of something hard into something yielding. When the mortar was finished, the old man and his wife pounded their rice, and the rice, as it was pounded, produced more rice, not a little more, not the small variations that occur naturally in the work of pounding, but genuinely more, the rice increasing rather than diminishing, the mortar filled and refilled by something that should have been exhausted and was not. They worked through the evening. They worked until they had more rice than they could use, more rice than they had started with, more rice than seemed possible from the quantity they had begun. They sat in the warmth of the kitchen with the evidence of this abundance around them and felt again the particular quality of the unexpected gift, of something that could not have been predicted and could not be explained and was simply, unmistakably there. The mortar and the rice. In Japan, the pounding of rice into mochi is one of the most ancient domestic rituals, a practice that has been part of Japanese life for more than 2,000 years, appearing in the oldest records and continuing, in various forms, to the present day. Mochi is made from a particular kind of rice, mochigome, glutinous rice, which has a higher starch content than the rice eaten in ordinary meals and produces, when cooked and pounded, the particular elastic, stretchy quality that mochi is known for. The pounding itself, mochitsuki, is a communal activity, traditionally done in the days before the New Year, when families and neighbors would gather around the large wooden mortar and take turns with the heavy mallet, the rhythm of the pounding setting a beat that everyone could feel, the steam rising from the hot rice, the smell of the cooking filling the cold air. There is something deeply satisfying about the process of mochitsuki that goes beyond the food it produces. The physical work, the lifting and striking, the coordination required when two people work together, one pounding and one turning the mochi between strokes, produces a particular quality of presence, of being entirely in the body and entirely in the moment, without the mind wandering to the past or the future. The finished mochi, soft and warm and fragrant, shaped into rounds and eaten with sweet bean paste or soy sauce and nori, has the quality of something that was made with the body and is received by the body, a food that carries in it the warmth of the work that made it. The old man's mortar multiplied the rice, more rice than was put in, more rice than was possible, the abundance that should not have been there and was. This is the story's way of saying that the old man's house was a place of genuine warmth, that the goodness that was in his life produced more than could be explained by ordinary means, that kindness compounds the way that the old stories have always said it does. The neighbors heard about the mortar. Of course they did. In a small village where the houses are close, and the walls are not thick, and the lives of neighbors are visible to each other in the ordinary course of ordinary days. Of course they heard. They asked to borrow it. The old man hesitated this time. The mortar was not simply a tool. It had come from Shiro, from the dream, from whatever it was that persisted of Shiro's presence in the world after Shiro was gone. It was not something he wanted to hand over to people who had not treated Shiro well, but they asked, and he found it difficult to refuse, and so he said yes. The neighbors took the mortar home. They pounded their rice. The rice did not multiply. It diminished, as rice always diminishes when you pound it, reduced by the pounding, made smaller by the work, behaving like rice rather than like something magical. Their frustration was immediate. They felt cheated, not by themselves, not by their own greed and impatience, but by the mortar, which had not performed for them the way it had apparently performed for the old man. In their frustration, they burned it. They put the mortar in their hearth and let it burn, and watched it become ash. Then they told the old man what they had done, again in the flat way, again without apology, the way of people who have convinced themselves that what was given to them was theirs to dispose of as they chose. The old man did not argue. He asked only for the ash. The neighbors looked at the ash in their hearth, the gray, unremarkable residue of the wood that had been the mortar, and could see no reason to refuse. They gave him the ash. It was late winter, the kind of late winter that Japan has in its mountain villages, cold still, the cold that has settled in deeply over the months of the season, and has become the quality of the air itself, present in everything, in the feel of the wood of the house, and the smell of the garden, and the particular quality of the morning light, when it comes low and pale through the bare branches of the trees. The cherry trees were bare. They stood in the cold in the particular way of deciduous trees in winter, without apology for what they had lost, without the appearance of waiting, simply present in their winter form, the form that precedes the form that everyone is waiting for. The old man took the ash. He carried it out into the garden with the particular care of someone carrying something fragile, something that is also precious. The ash that had been the mortar, that had been the pine tree that had grown in this garden while Shiro was alive. He stood beneath the bare cherry tree. He looked at it for a moment, at the branches against the pale winter sky, at the particular quality of bare branches that is not emptiness, but potential, the form of a tree that is full of what it will become. Then he began to scatter the ash. He scattered it the way you scatter something precious, not carelessly, not with the broad sweep of a person disposing of something unwanted, but with attention, each movement considered, the ash rising in a small cloud where his hands released it, and then settling, some of it onto the branches, some onto the dark soil beneath, and as the ash settled, the blossoms opened. Not slowly, not over days, but here, in this moment, in the cold of late winter, in the pale morning light, the blossoms opened, white and pink, the particular colors of Japanese cherry blossoms that people travel from everywhere to see in spring. Those colors, those blossoms, appearing on the bare branches as the ash fell among them, as if the ash had called them up from wherever they had been waiting and they had come. The tree was covered. Where there had been bare branches and cold air, there were blossoms, hundreds, thousands, the full flowering of a cherry tree in a single moment, in the wrong season, because of an old man with ash in his hands and love in his heart. The village in winter. A Japanese mountain village in the cold months has a particular quality, a stillness that is different from the stillness of other seasons, a slowing down that is not just the temperature, but something more fundamental, a shift in the rhythm of life that has been part of how people have lived in such places for as long as people have lived in them. The rice had been harvested in autumn. The fields that had been green with growing rice through the long summer and had turned gold as the season turned were now bare, gray-brown, the stubble cut, and the soil turned and waiting for the spring planting that was still months away. The work of winter is different from the work of summer. In summer, the rice fields require constant attention, the water levels managed, the weeds removed, the plants watched for signs of disease or damage, and the days are long and full and the body tired in the way of bodies that have done real work in heat. In winter, the fields do not need tending, and the days are short and the light is thin, and the cold keeps people closer to the warmth of their houses than the summer allows. There is time in winter, time for the repair of tools and the making of things and the conversations that the busy seasons do not have space for, time for the particular quality of sitting that is not idleness, but rest, the earned rest of people who have done a full year's work and are now in the season that requires less. The old man and his wife sat together in the evenings of that winter in the warmth of their house. The absence of Shiro was present with them, present in the specific way of absences, which is to say it was not nothing but something, the shape of what was gone still legible in the space where it had been. They did not speak of it much. They did not need to. They simply sat together in the warmth and the quiet and the particular quality of winter that, for all its cold, has a kind of gentleness to it, the gentleness of the world that has put down its work and is resting. Word spread through the village quickly, in a small village in late winter, when the cold has gone on long enough to have become the whole quality of the world, when the memory of warmth and color has begun to feel like something from a long time ago. The sudden appearance of cherry blossoms on a tree is not something that can be contained. People came. They stood at the edge of the garden and looked at the blossoming tree with the particular expression of people who are seeing something they did not think was possible and are adjusting, in real time, their understanding of what possible means. Among those who came was the lord of the district. He was making his winter rounds, the tour of the territory that lords made at this time of year, partly administrative, partly ceremonial, the showing of presence that was part of what it meant to be the person responsible for a place and its people. He saw the tree. He stopped. He had seen cherry trees in blossom before, had seen them every spring, had the particular appreciation for their beauty that any person raised in Japan develops over the course of a life spent in the presence of that beauty. But he had not seen this, had not seen blossoms in winter, had not seen the sudden transformation of a bare tree into something that should have required months more of warmth and time. He asked about the old man. He was brought to the gate of the garden. The old man came out, not nervous, not performing humility, simply himself, the person he had always been, an old man in a winter garden with ash on his hands. The Lord asked him to demonstrate, to show what he had done, to make the thing happen again if it could be made to happen. The old man looked at the bare trees that were still bare, the ones that the ash had not yet reached. He reached into the cloth that held the remaining ash. He scattered it. And again, the blossoms came. Why did the ash work for the old man and not for the neighbor? This is the question at the heart of the story, the question that the story is really asking beneath the surface of its events. The easy answer is, because the old man was good and the neighbor was not. But this is too simple, and folk tales are rarely as simple as their surface suggests. The neighbor was not evil. He was not cruel by nature, or not only cruel, but a person in whom greed had become the loudest voice, the voice that drowned out the other voices that might have spoken differently. He had done wrong things. He had done them because he wanted something and saw a way to get it. This is human, not admirable, but deeply, recognizably human. The difference between the two men was not that one was good and one was evil. The difference was in how they related to what they received. The old man received what came to him with gratitude, not performed gratitude, not the outward show of thankfulness that is really a form of self-congratulation, but genuine gratitude, the feeling of a person who recognizes that what they have was not inevitable, who does not take their good fortune as evidence of their own deservingness, but as a gift from something outside themselves. The neighbor received what came to him, or what he hoped would come to him, as something owed. He had done the things. He had gone through the motions. The treasure should have appeared. The rice should have multiplied. The blossoms should have come. When they did not, his frustration was the frustration of someone who feels cheated, who had expected a transaction and found instead that the world did not work that way. The ash worked for the old man because the old man was not trying to make it work. He was not standing beneath the tree calculating what he might receive. He was standing beneath the tree with the ash that had been Shiro's tree, the ash that was the last material form of a thing he had loved, and he was giving it back to the world the way you give back something that was never really yours to keep. And the world received it and gave back flowers. Let us stay for a moment with the cherry blossoms, with the particular place they hold in the Japanese imagination, which is a place unlike the place any other flower holds in any other culture. Sakura. The word itself has a quality in Japanese that no translation captures, a sound that is both light and complete, both immediate and resonant, a word that carries in its two syllables everything that the flower means. Cherry blossoms bloom in Japan for a very short time. This is central to what they mean. The blooming period is measured in days, a week, perhaps 2 weeks, depending on the year and the weather, and the blossoms, once open, fall quickly, the petals releasing from the branches in the wind and drifting downward in the particular slow way of falling petals that seems to say something about the relationship between beauty and impermanence. The Japanese aesthetic concept of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the passing of things, the particular emotion that beautiful things evoke precisely because they will not last, is perhaps most completely expressed in the cherry blossom. You cannot look at cherry blossoms without also seeing their ending. The beauty and the brevity are inseparable. The tree is never more beautiful than in the moment when the petals are beginning to fall, when the bloom is at its peak and already passing. Hanami, the practice of flower viewing, is one of the oldest Japanese traditions, recorded in sources from more than 1,000 years ago, when the aristocrats of the Heian court would gather beneath the blossoming trees to compose poetry and drink wine and attend to the beauty that was available only in this brief window of this particular season. The tradition has continued. Every spring, people in Japan spread their blankets beneath the cherry trees, in parks and along riverbanks, and in temple gardens, and sit with friends and family and food and drink, and look up at the blossoms above them, and feel the particular thing that cherry blossoms make you feel, which is the combination of joy and sadness that is at the heart of the most beautiful things. The old man's ash made the blossoms come in winter, made them come in the cold, in the wrong season, when they had no business being there. This was the miracle. Not just that flowers bloomed from ash, but that the time of flowers was extended, that beauty was made available beyond its appointed season, that the cold and the bare were briefly, impossibly, made warm and full. The Lord's procession had stopped. This was not a small thing. The stopping of a Lord's procession was not a casual event. It meant that something had interrupted the ordinary business of power, had inserted itself between the Lord and his destination, with enough force and novelty to make the destination temporarily irrelevant. The Lord was a person of considerable rank, the kind of rank that, in the Japan of the old stories, placed a person in a relationship to the world that was entirely different from the relationship of ordinary people. He moved through the landscape attended and protected, the center of a structure of obligation and ceremony that organized everything around him in relation to himself. Beauty was available to him in ways it was not available to ordinary people. The most skilled artists worked for him. The most elaborate gardens were his. The finest food and music were part of the ordinary texture of his days. And yet the blossoms on the bare tree stopped him. Not the beauty of prepared things, not the beauty that had been arranged and cultivated specifically for his pleasure, but this, an old man in a winter garden with ash in his hands, and blossoms appearing on branches that should have been bare. The surprise of it, the impossibility of it, the way it arrived from outside the ordinary arrangements that governed his life, from outside the structure of rank and ceremony and preparation, arrived simply, without announcement, in the cold air of a winter morning in a village he was passing through. He rewarded the old man generously, not because the old man had done anything for him personally, had not built him a garden, or composed him a poem, or served him in any of the ordinary ways that people of lesser rank served people of greater rank, but because the old man had shown him something that could not be arranged or purchased, the particular beauty of what happens when the world responds to genuine kindness with something that goes beyond what kindness can logically produce. He gave what he had to give, and the old man accepted it with the same quality of gratitude with which he had accepted everything, not grasping, not performing, simply receiving what had come. The neighbors had watched all of this. They had watched the blossoms appear on the tree. They had watched the people come. They had watched the Lord arrive and stop and look and call for the old man, and reward him with the gifts that lords give to people who have done something that has genuinely delighted them. They had watched the old man go back into his house with more than he had come out with, with the recognition and the reward that had come from the ash, from the mortar, from everything that had begun with Shiro in the field that long ago morning. They still had some ash. Not much. The old man had asked for all of it, and they had given him most, but some, a small amount, saved without quite knowing why, kept back in a corner of the hearth with the particular logic of people who save things, not because they have a use for them, but because they cannot quite bring themselves to let them go. They would try. They had nothing to lose. The ash was ash. The mortar was gone. Shiro was gone. All of it was already gone. And the Lord was still in the area, still making his rounds, still available to be impressed. They went out to find a tree. They found one. A bare tree in the cold. An ordinary tree. One of many in the village that was waiting for spring in the patient way that trees wait. The neighbor stood beneath it with ash in his hands. He scattered it. Not with the attention of the old man, not with the quality of care that the old man had brought to his own scattering, but with the impatience of a person who wants the result and is going through the motions of the method. The ash scattered. The tree remained bare. No blossoms came. After the blossoms in winter, after the Lord's procession had moved on, after the neighbors had attempted and failed, after the rewards had been given and accepted, spring came. Real spring, the spring that arrives on its own schedule, without the help of ash or miracles. The spring that comes every year, that has always come, that will continue to come with the reliable regularity of the earth's turning. The snow in the mountains melted, and the water came down into the valleys and the fields. The soil warmed, slowly, degree by degree, the warmth working its way down from the surface into the deeper layers where the seeds were waiting. The seeds knew. This is what seeds do. They wait in the dark, with a specific sensitivity to the conditions that will allow them to become what they are, and when those conditions arrive, they respond. The cherry trees blossomed again, not because of ash this time, not because of any human agency, but because it was spring, because the accumulated warmth of the lengthening days had reached the threshold at which cherry trees bloom. The blossoms came in the way they always come, gradually, the buds swelling over days, then opening, slowly at first, and then all at once, the bare branches filling with the particular pink-white of sakura in full bloom. The old man stood in his garden and looked at the cherry tree that he had scattered ash on in the winter. It was blooming again. Not because of the ash now. The ash had done its work in winter, but because spring had come and the tree was alive, and alive things bloom when the conditions are right. He thought of Shiro, not with the acute pain of fresh grief that had softened over the months, but with the particular quality of missing someone who has been gone long enough that the missing has become part of the texture of ordinary life, present but not overwhelming, a thread woven through the days. The blossoms moved in the spring wind. Petals fell. The old man watched them fall and thought, this is what was given. This is what Shiro brought. Not just the coins, not just the rice, not just the winter blossoms, but this, the spring, and the blossoms, and the particular quality of standing in a garden and watching something beautiful, and knowing that the world is, in its way, generous. Let it all soften now, the small village in the cold, the white dog in the morning field, the spade going into the dark soil and the coins appearing, the dream, the pine tree in the garden, the smell of the mortar and the rice that multiplied, the ash in the old man's hands, the bare branches of the cherry tree, the blossoms opening in the wrong season, in the cold, because of the quality of what brought them there. Let it dissolve gently, the way ash dissolves into the air, rising in a small cloud and then settling, becoming part of the surface of things, invisible but present, the way everything that has happened remains present in the places where it happened. There is something in this story for sleep, not the lesson, not the moral, but the quality of the old man himself, the quality of someone who moves through the world without calculation, without the constant background assessment of what each thing might yield, without the exhausting arithmetic of advantage and disadvantage that occupies so much of the waking mind. He simply did what seemed right when it seemed right to do it. He gave when he had something to give. He received what came to him without grasping for more. And the world around him, the coins in the soil, the rice in the mortar, the blossoms from the ash, responded to this quality in the way that the world sometimes does, in the stories that the cultures of the world have always told themselves about how kindness works. Tonight, let your own calculations rest. Let the assessing and the planning and the working out wait until morning, when they will be available again, patient as ever. For now there is only this, the cold air of a winter garden, the bare branches against the pale sky, the ash rising and settling, and then the blossoms, unexpected, impossible, entirely real, opening one by one in the silence of the late winter morning, filling the cold air with what spring had promised and winter had kept until now. Rest, well, sleep, well, good night.